Hello, leader. Welcome back to the Fierce Factor podcast. You are here for episode number 206 and my incredible conversation with the dynamic Nicola Lowrey, PA and founder and CEO of N2 Aesthetics in Manhattan Beach, California. Nicola is a highly sought after industry leader and one of the most requested industry speakers and trainers in the US because she is so passionate about education, anatomy, and safety with injectables. Nicola graduated from USC's Keck School of Medicine in 2003 with her master's in physician assistant practice. She began specializing in cosmetic injectables early in 2004. And here, 20 years later, you'll hear how her commitment to advancing the aesthetic industry has not changed one little bit. In fact, she is a contributing author on multiple evidence-based and anatomical publications, and she even has a book on the horizon, #Anatomy Sunday, a manual for injectors. This comprehensive textbook focuses on injector-specific anatomy and some of Nicola's favorite treatment pearls. And believe it or not, she doesn't feel like she can publish the book yet because there's so much more she needs to continue to learn and share with the world. And what's amazing about this conversation is that she really opens up about what it has been like launching a business during a very traumatic time personally. She talks about the gift of learning, teaching, and growing in this industry, but also how imposter syndrome creeps up, even for a highly regarded woman and practitioner like her. She almost made me emotional when she shared her perspective on facing adversity. Summarizing her language here, but she talked about how there will always be something to complain about, something standing in your way, or something that could completely derail you from your goal, but never negotiate on your integrity and doing the things you believe should be done the right way, even if it's unpopular. And y'all know that's my love language right there. We discuss her opinion on private equity coming into the aesthetic space, the trajectory of N2 Aesthetics, and we talk about Nicola's thought leadership goals. And I know you'll learn so much and feel so inspired, like I did after listening to this interview, where she explains through a collection of brilliant stories how things happen for you, not to you. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with the beautiful and talented Nicola Lowrey. Hi there. Welcome to the Fierce Factor podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Lindholm. And I think it's time for us women to shift the conversation in business and step into our feminine leadership to do the most iconic work the aesthetic industry has ever seen. Each week, I'll be bringing a powerful dose of strategy, sarcasm, solutions, and sass that will rev up your creativity and ignite your brilliance as you link arms with me along our shared path of personal and professional growth in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hello, Fierce Factor listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. You are tuning into such an incredibly well-anticipated episode, a conversation that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I have a special guest for you guys today. I have Nicola Lowrey of N2 Aesthetics. She's a PA who's been truly a thought leader in our industry and someone that I have looked up to from afar. And really, I'm just excited to have you, Nicola, on the show. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Good morning. So a little background, as we enroll new Academy members into our programming, we get to get to know a lot about them, their experience, their perspective on the industry. And one of the questions we ask them in their onboarding questionnaire is who they look up to as a mentor / who are they fangirling over. And Nicola, your name comes up again and again and again. And I was like, I need to get to know this woman. And so I actually reached out to you and said, hey, I told you a little bit about the story and some of our mutual friends and colleagues as well. And you agreed to have this conversation with me. So thanks.
I mean, we talked about it when we spoke on the phone that day, but it was very serendipitous because a good friend of mine works very closely with you. And I had started following you on social media and just started really feeling like your posts resonated a lot with me. And I was like, how does she know me? Like, and then I forwarded one of your really compelling posts over to my clinical manager and told her, I was like, we should start listening to these and then maybe like meet on them and like talk through them like when we have our like monthly meeting, just so we can say where would what she's sharing like apply to us, and like what can we use to help, because I mean the thing is we're all still trying to figure it out at the end of the day, right?
Yes.
Like that's the truth. Like no one's arrived.
I mean, that just warms my heart that, because I'm talking into a microphone and like hope somebody listens, so I appreciate that. But truly, and I think that's what's so cool about being able to bring someone like you where you are in, and the perception and, optics of like where you are in your business and life, obviously. And here you are saying we haven't arrived, right? And that's because it's an ebb and flow in a journey in life. And that's really what I want to kind of dig into with you today and peel back some layers about kind of how you did get to where you are and what is that mindset, in terms of how do we like what kind of thinking, what kind of habits, what kind of mental sort of attitude do we have to have toward the way that we approach our work to achieve the kind of success that you have? So how about we start out by you just telling us a little bit about you and N2 Aesthetics?
Okay. Well, I've been around a long time. N2 Aesthetics, not so much, which is kind of the irony of it all. So N2 Aesthetics is just now, it's baby. It's just 2 years old, which is on one hand feels like a really long time, and on the other is just a blink. But I have been a PA for now 21 years. Graduated from LA County USC, Keck School of Medicine for my PA program back in 2003. Specifically was intending to go into ER and did that, and actually practiced emergency medicine for 15 years of my professional career, and loved it. It was, I'm a kind of an adrenaline junkie, really fast paced, definitely able to solve problems and wrap them up neatly with a bow and send them out the door and not have to deal with kind of the chronic difficulties that medicine often kind of unfortunately, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think for me, the frustration with traditional medicine and just throwing pills at everything and people not being accountable for their health, like that was not something I ever saw myself being able to do well. But the ER was a great place for me. However, I also did get to a point where the ER was, I was pretty burned out. I recognized that my perspective on patients in the ER had shifted to a point where I thought everyone was drug seeking and crazy. And it was probably the time for me to leave because I was probably going to miss something and maybe hurt somebody. And that wasn't going to be good for anybody. So and simultaneously, the thing is, I started my aesthetic career just 1 year out of my PA program. And the way that I was introduced to aesthetics is kind of unique, and it's a fun story. So 2002 was the year that Botox Cosmetic launched. And I was midway through my PA program. One of our clinical educators was a PA that worked in dermatology. And he was younger. And I think, and myself and a couple of the girls that I like studied with every week, we were a little bit older. Like we didn't go like straight from high school to college to PA school. We all kind of had done some other things and then kind of ended ourselves there. And we were in our late 20s, early 30s at that point. And he came to one of our, one day at school, we were, doing our clinicals. And he said, you guys, there's this new medication. He goes, we just got samples of it. He goes, it's supposed to like get rid of the wrinkles between your eyes. And we're like, what? And he's like, no, yeah. He's like, it seems really cool. He goes, but I haven't really tried it on anybody yet. He goes,
You're like, I'm into the drug seeking.
Well, and but so the thing is, I think he kind of had a crush on like one of the girls in my study group, right? So he wanted like an excuse to like come to one of our at-home study sessions. And he's like, why don't I come over on Thursday when you guys get together? And he goes, and we'll just try it. Like, I'll inject you guys with it. We'll see what happens. And we're all like, sure, right? So he comes over. Each one of us, there's 4 of us, each one of us got 20 units in our glabellar complex. And, a couple weeks later, it kicked in. I'm like, what the heck is this magic juju, right? I'm like, I'm obsessed. It's so cool. And I remember telling my husband, who was then just my boyfriend, and I said, I don't know. I said, but this is kind of fun. I feel like I would want to do this too. And so graduated 2003, got my first ER job, kind of made sure I had my, feet grounded in that world a little bit. And then in 2004, started just searching out like education opportunities on this like aesthetic thing, and went to a little 2-day course where on day 1, and now this is 2004. And I think that was the year that we had our first hyaluronic acid filler, which was just plain old resty. And so on day 1, we learned how to inject 20 units in the glabellar complex with Botox. And on day 2, they handed us a syringe of Restylane, and they taught us how to fan in the mid depth and the nasolabial fold with a needle, which just, I mean, the fact that like, I don't even know, and put just 4 boluses into the lip. And that's how you did filler. And I got a certificate. And just around that same time, there was a medical spa that had opened just up the street from my house. And I thought, oh my God, I can walk there. Went in there, kind of just like cold called, the guy, took my CV, introduced myself, said, I took a course, I'm certified, I'd love to come do this for you. And he hired me. It was a businessman that owned this little like sketchy med spa in Hermosa Beach. I never knew who my medical director was. I think he was like an orthopedic surgeon in Arizona. And I started doing aesthetics.
And there you have it.
And there you have it.
Oh my goodness. So you were doing this while you were working in the ER.
So that was, yes. So I had a quote unquote full-time gig in the ER, which was 3 shifts, right? So 3 shifts in the ER, and then I would do 2 shifts at the med spa, and that was my life. And that kind of was for a while. Got married and then started having babies, and was working way more part-time, kind of never went back full-time to the ER, and still stayed part-time in the aesthetics gig, which was obviously the easier, fluffier gig, like no stress, shorter shifts, closer to home, all the things. And yes, did that simultaneously, both things for 15 years. And then just, maybe 2018, maybe a little bit before that, I started educating in the aesthetic space. So first came Instagram, and then came my opportunity to start educating. And I was brought on with Allergan as, independent contractor to start teaching for them, and got very popular very quick in terms of like requests for trainings. And, in terms of one, I loved it. So even going back farther into my history, a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. I danced professionally in my life, and started dancing when I was 2.5 years old. I'm a little teapot, right? And by the time I was 15, I was actually doing like paid contract work. I was doing stuff,
Okay,
Disney.
I just feel so much better hearing this, because I saw you post yourself in a handstand on your 50th birthday or something. Like, wow, I got to step up my game.
I do not dance anymore, and I think my back hurt for 2 weeks after that post. But you do it for the gram. With some viral,
it was worth it. It's worth
something on TikTok. But yes, I dance professionally, and when I was in high school, some of my first like jobs making money was teaching. And I loved to teach. And I feel like there is this big crossover between being able to teach dance, which is an intricate understanding of your body and where it is in space and how to correctly, drive movement. And then how can I teach someone to improve their technical skills with injecting, right?
Yeah.
And so somehow, some way, there's this opportunity to take something that's conceptually a little bit difficult and to break it down and simplify it for people so that they can improve with their skill. And for whatever reason, I love that. I think that it's something that really, it just feels good to me to offer that and to see people to improve. I don't know. I love it. Just always loved teaching. And it's funny because when I was growing up as a kid, like I had all my stuffed animals I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
But I get to teach on things, not children, and on something that I love to do and feel very passionate about. And so it's all kind of like intertwined and worked out together, right? Because I think at the end of the day, to be able to get up on a stage and to speak and to present you have to have a little bit of an entertainer's mindset too, right? The show must go on. Doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You get out there and you give everything you've got, and you when you nail it and when you're in the flow, it's like so many things just line up so similarly with those two worlds. Sports performance, whether or not, speaking engagements, all the things, they kind of come from the same place, right?
Yeah, well, totally. I think it's fun to think back to what interested us when we grew up. My mom reminded me recently, she was like, you just wanted to be behind a microphone all the time, and I always wanted to be the lead in the play and be a sports broadcaster when like that started to get popular. And she was like, you're doing it. That's such a, like you're doing your podcast,
Yes.
So think back to the things that lit you up. It's kind of neat. And I see that how all these things, like I'm learning about you already, like just even when you said you were, an ER provider, like that is like that adrenaline, that sort of fast, like quick decision-making, agility, ability to stay calm under pressure, ability to help others kind of through some of that teaching stuff, I think through a challenging process where you can kind of manage all of that and multitask. You're a go-getter, all of these things. So now you started N2 Aesthetics 2 years ago, which is such an interesting time because then we got through this whole COVID pandemic and then you're like, you know what? How about let's do this?
Well, it's funny because, early on, right when I, had gotten that little certificate in aesthetics and kind of trying to sort out what was I going to do with my life, I had found out about a franchise opportunity where I could have purchased in and owned, a med spa at that point. And I tend to be someone that always dots every I, crosses every T. I am afraid to live and work in a gray zone. I don't tolerate like malpractice risk or like just medical legal risk in terms of business owning well. Like I've always put myself as much in a bubble as I can in that regard. And I think it's that ER mentality too, because everything is, a CYA, right? Your algorithm for treatment, everything. And I really worked with really incredible physicians early on in my career. And honestly, even just full circle, that evidence-based medicine drive and the why behind every medical decision that we made for our patients translated over for me in aesthetics and was a great source of frustration early on in my career and is probably my greatest joy now that I see that we're shifting that way in this space. But back to, the purchasing of the franchise, there was a physician that was putting this whole thing together. And I remember reading through the contract, like I went very far down this pathway and I was reading through the contract and like recognized this one physician was running this whole show and his intention was to open like 20 of these clinics and he was going to be the main medical provider and he was selling them all to mid-levels. And I thought, well, your physician oversight regulation is going way beyond what it should. Like, how are we going to make sure we're not all going to go down and get in major trouble? Mm-hmm. And he lost his top, screamed at me, kicked me out of his office, and the deal was basically done because he was super shady. And I thought, well, thank God I asked that question. Of course it stung. And of course it like derailed because I had this whole intention of like going down this pathway with this guy and really saw myself doing it. And then, interestingly enough, I was pregnant very short after that. And so it just kind of all worked out as it should. And then my second son was like a little bit quicker than we ever really expected. My boys are like 18 months apart. And so I was in the weeds for a hot minute, and probably, things happen for you, not to you. And that's been a big thing that I now, in almost all situations, it resonates with me. It applies to all the bad things that have happened to me happened for me, and there's an appreciation for what we don't understand when it's happening, and it helps me now to realize
what a lesson too. Sorry, not to cut you off. I like leaning back into that conversation, because what's sort of like shocking and not shocking to me is the fact that you're the only one. Like, this guy's opening up a 10 location franchise, and you're the only one who asked him those questions. And like, he's strong arming everybody like, oh, I'm so lucky. Yeah, let's do this. I mean, these are huge decisions. And I can imagine that was a big learning lesson for you too. Like speak up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ask the right questions. And it almost became the opportunity, like the window that closed that opened the door.
Yes, I think it put it on a little bit of a pause. And I continued to practice aesthetics. I was kind of like a serial monogamist. Like I was like 4 years here and then 4 years there. And it was like I would grow out of a space and then move into another space. And at one point was working in a family practice / urgent care, where the physician also like had his little certificate in Botox because he did his wife and his friends. And I kind of like did this little mock business opening where I kind of launched an aesthetic practice within his practice. And that gave me a little bit of that experience, and kind of like, I didn't go into someone's established practice and become part of that. I sort of did that. And then, but then he turned out to be kind of a bad guy. So left that. I mean, it's like, I've had all of my trials and tribulations. I've kind of been through it all. And got to a point, where really, truly, I was working with a facial plastic surgeon, and I was the driving force of like most of the patients coming into that practice. And I truly didn't fit. I didn't fit into their scheduling model. I didn't, I was actually told at one point like that I was a burden on the reception staff because there was too many calls for me. And I was like, are you serious that we're having this conversation right now? Like, I'm sorry.
Can you just dial, not be quite as awesome? Like, just dial it back a little.
It's just, and it's funny because it's like the age of social media, because I've been doing this a really long time, but for like the majority of my career, nobody knew who I was. I had good Yelp reviews, right? And it was like, I had a nice practice. I had word of mouth, and I had, enough positive reviews on Yelp that if you Googled me after someone told me, it was all good. And then I started Instagram, and it really, I think timing has a lot to do with it. Those of us that started a little bit, I wasn't even like the earliest, truly though. I know girls that had started, 2-3 years even before I did, but it changed my life, and people knew, like, why do people know who I am and tell you that I'm the person that they wanted you to have on your podcast? There's no other way that they would have known, really. I mean,
lots of creepers like me out there, let me tell you.
What's that?
I said there's lots of creepers out there like me.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's true, right? Sort of like and it's the tyranny of social media. It's like the open door to visibility. It's the ability to market and scale, in an affordable way. And it also is like equally such a big responsibility, And so, how do you show up? And we can talk specifically about Instagram, but, do you feel like because of that, you had your head down, you're an educator, you're doing your thing, you're teaching, you're, growing and developing just internally, like this sort of inside out philosophy. And then all of a sudden now you have this brand, you have this presence. Did you feel pressure? I mean, how did that change the way that you showed up?
Did I feel pressure in terms of what?
Yeah, in general, now I have this exposure and there's for example,
yes, of course.
spotlight on me. Mm-hmm.
So yes. And there's a love hate. I think everybody has a love hate with the social media responsibility. And the fact of the matter is we have to do it in this space. I mean, people don't look at your website in the same way. Yes, I do think that people will utilize reviews to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, social media has allowed this opportunity for people to kind of get to know you. And you have the opportunity to put your best face forward and, choose how much vulnerability you'll have or how much it's really driven by, more of a hired out marketing company that helps you with it. I think the magic sauce is that you have to do a lot of it on your own. I don't believe that you can be as successful if you have someone else doing it for you. And so with that, then becomes the pressure of consistency with posts, making sure that your posts are good. It truly does become a third job, right? Like, for me, had my teaching job, I had my clinical job, and then I had my social media job, and then I'm a mom, right? And so there's a lot. We're spread thin, and I think that at first, there's pros and cons to it all always. When I first started my account, there was a woman I was working with who was poo-pooing my strategy. And I don't know. I mean, I just kind of felt like I wanted to do what felt right to me. And I didn't want it to be like a marketing type thing. I never even to this day feel great when it seems like a post is too salesy. Like it's not. I think that the value comes when you share value with others and then they find a compelling reason that they want to follow, right? Who wants to follow a bunch of commercials? We all hate commercials. That's why we've gone to, streaming TV. Like we don't want to see commercials. Mm-hmm. And so there has to be a value. And so when nobody was talking about anatomy when I started talking about anatomy, nobody. And I don't know if I have anything to do with the trajectory of why anatomy became so popular, but maybe. And I know for me that it was an opportunity that not only was I spending time on creating posts, but I was simultaneously educating myself. Mm-hmm. So maybe there was value in two ways. And I was studying, and I'll tell you why. Happened for me, not to me, but I had the worst complication, still to this day, about 10 years ago now. I've been injecting for 20 years and I've had 2 vascular adverse events in 20 years, which I think is actually, and actually the second one was just last year. And so that also goes to show that even if you're doing quote unquote everything right, that you can still run into trouble. My experience between the first one that I had where I didn't even know that was something that could happen, because no one had educated us. No one ever talked about complications. It wasn't sexy to go take a cadaver course, and now I tell trainees this all the time. Like on one hand, they're so fortunate because they have access to so much information, but on the other hand, oh my gosh, how overwhelming. Like, who do you go train with and who do you believe and what course has value? And it's a lot to have to sift through. And it's also like an insurmountable amount of information when you're trying to get started. For me, it was like this 2-day course and like, here, you're an expert. Here's your certificate.
Right.
You know everything that there is to know because there was nothing to know. And now there's so much to know. But I had a vascular occlusion, and I put air quotes because we don't know. There's so much to consider in terms of like what does that truly mean and what's going on. But that's a whole other podcast. But I recognized that I didn't deserve to be doing what I was doing. I didn't know enough to. That where I felt like I should even be allowed to continue and to inject another face. And there was a crossroads there. And it was, I had hurt somebody very badly. And I thought the whole thing, and then the recognition that the regulatory oversight, the the lack of like, you know, true certification in a specialty, the lack of true education, I just felt like, whoa, what is going on here? Like it was just a true like perspective changer for me. And I had a choice to either stop doing it, and I kind of wanted to because that was awful. I mean, I didn't sleep or eat for 2 weeks while I was hand-holding this woman through this process where truly, I mean, Hylenex just came into the space. Like I had not heard of it. And, you know, luckily I was, my supervising MD at that time was a plastic surgeon and, you know, helped guide me, and the medical science liaison team at Allergan, like everyone came together and I felt supported, but I also just felt like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I could do this to somebody, you know? And so then that ended up kind of pushing me, you know, and I guess I'm not a quitter. Like that's probably one thing that I would say is that like when the crap hits the fan, it's like, I dig deep oftentimes. And I decided that to do this, to keep doing this, that I had to actually understand it. And that's when my anatomy journey began. And like I said, it was before it was sexy. You had to find people that would be willing to allow you to come into their clinical space, find mentors, you know, and it was around that same time that I met one of my greatest mentors, and actually our medical director, Dr. Steve Yolen. And he really was just, you know, and everybody that knows Steve, there's an example of someone who doesn't have a website or a social media and everybody knows who he is, right? So let's be that unicorn. But yeah, so, you know, a lot of, you know, Becky Fitzgerald, Jonathan Sykes, Steve Yolen, you know, I think Palette Resources kind of started around that same time. I started getting myself involved in courses with them and just really understanding, you know, what are we really doing here, you know? And so while I've been doing this for 20 years, I feel like honestly, my education only started 10 years ago. And before that, I just thought it was like a fun, fluffy gig where I got to see friends and make people look pretty. And like, there was no stress involved in it, you know? And so then when I started, you know, it's a long story, long answer to a silly question, but I started my Instagram sharing what I was learning simultaneously. And then just one day I was like, I recognized, because, you know, I was busy all week. I recognized that I was kind of spending a lot of my Saturdays like studying and kind of creating content and then posting it on Sunday. It's just what happened. And then it birthed hashtag Anatomy Sunday, which, you know, kind of, it became a hashtag that a lot of people followed, thousands of people followed. And then there was a pressure to every Sunday come up with a hashtag Anatomy Sunday. Yeah. But what ended up happening, and, you know, this is both like a great accomplishment and also in my mind right now, something that is still needing attention. And because it's been such a long, strained thing, maybe a little bit of failure on my part and part of the, like, I'm too busy, you know, syndrome. But I have a book. I have a book called hashtag Anatomy Sunday. It's on this computer on a, on a folder, but I have yet to finish the process of getting it, you know, edited and laid out beautifully and published. And so at some point, by the time I finally get to that, I'm going to have to revise it so much because, you know, every year I learn more and would hate to put something out that wasn't 100% relevant. So we'll see.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of, it's funny. That's the conundrum, right? Because as you advance, and I found this, and certainly, you as a clinical provider, you see this with athletes, you see this with real estate agents, right? As you grow and you become bigger and better and smarter and learn more, you almost get to this like precipice where you realize that you start to become more aware of what you don't know. It's really interesting, like where, right? You're sort of just what's that, like kind of naively unaware in the beginning, and like everything's just, you're excited. And then when you really start to take command and have experience, and, you know, I can imagine, right? 10 years ago, you were in a situation where you had this adverse event and you were like, I need all the resources that I can get to help me through this. Well, now the industry's advanced so much. I'm having conversations on a regular basis with our clients who are like, yeah, my medical director checked out and I need somebody to help me, and, or they're, you know, trying to push limits. And so it's sort of like, who's going to be the one, or who's going to step up and be that, sort of take that responsibility to go in and, you know, take the risk of learning and teaching and growing to pave the way for everybody else, you know. And that's sort of where I think I see, it's Anatomy Sunday for you, but where a lot of people are craving that knowledge and trying to turn to somebody that they can trust, who they know is investing and learning and innovating constantly. Do you feel like this sort of like drive to learn and teach, right? So there's sort of like the two sides of the same coin for me, has influenced the brand of your business of Into Aesthetics? Is that something that do you see the business and the clinical as the same, one and the same, or are they different for you?
I hear weekly from patients, and I have people that fly in from all over the country to see me, and a lot of times the messaging is that it's because they see that I'm the one out there teaching so many others, that they feel that I'm the one that they could trust the easiest, right? And a lot of people come to me, and I love these patients, to be fair, where they've not had any work done before because they've been nervous about getting work. And, I always say this when I'm educating, like there's 3 barriers to treatment, right? There's the fear of looking weird. There's the financial, inability to maybe afford these types of treatments. And then there's also just like a fear of pain or needles that like is also kind of a thing that like keeps people from coming in easily. But the number one thing is that people are afraid that they're going to look unnatural and that their husbands are going to be like, what, and these are people that followed me for not just a little minute, but like maybe a couple of years. And they finally are like, okay, I think you're it, and you're going to take good care of me. And it is because of the education piece. So I do think that, of course, everything is synergistically feeding each other. And people say that. I know a lot of educators that have stopped clinically practicing. And while they're great educators, I just can't imagine being as relevant as an educator without continuously feeding what I also gain and learn from actually being in practice. So there's a beautiful balance. And kind of going back to the ER days, I'm a Libra, and I think I have this whole always just this yin and yang, right? And it's funny because I used to say that like it depended on which cocktail party I was at. And if someone asked what I did, right? Like if it was, I'd be like, oh, I'm the lead PA in the emergency room down at, Chalk down in Orange County. Or, oh yeah, no, I could totally do your Botox. Or like it just depended on who I was talking to.
Yeah.
I had these, this split personalities, dual lives. And education, and I used to fear giving up the ER because I felt like it made me smarter. It made me better as a practitioner to be in that environment. And on one hand, it is true, right? Because I'm taking my boards right now. And then I never used to have to study for my boards. And I'm like, oh gosh, what is this heart rhythm that I'm like, and so I'm having to I'm having to work a little bit harder on those boards right now because it's been a long time since I've been in the ER. But the teaching piece and also, even now more recently, I've been more involved in clinical research and publications. And that's been something that is, there's no money in it. None. Like I haven't made $1 for any of the all-nighters I've pulled, trying to rewrite, publications to get them accepted. And last year I traveled all over the world, scanning people's temples for a study that we're waiting on the acceptance right now for the publication to come out. And, you give up time with your family and from your clinic and, it costs you. But it is one of those things that, you want to make a difference. I want to be one of those people that's contributing on that level, not just sharing other people's work, but also being able to come to our realizations of, there's just still so much that we don't know.
Hey, I have a quick announcement, Goddess. I am thrilled to introduce a game changer in the world of female entrepreneurship. Introducing the Alt Experience. This May 17th and 18th in Newport Beach, California, we're setting the stage for something extraordinary. Imagine a gathering where female entrepreneurs share, learn, and connect like never before. The Alt Experience is that rare event where actionable strategies, meaningful connections, and transformational growth come together under one roof. The Alt experience is all about learning the stories of adversity from thought leaders, sharing this seemingly uncharted and often lonely journey of entrepreneurship. It's the event you've always wished for, designed exclusively for women like you, ready to elevate your business and shatter those glass ceilings. For 2 days, immerse yourself in workshops, mastermind sessions, and talks from industry leaders who are eager to share their journeys and insights. This is where visionary thinking meets actionable advice, all set against the backdrop of the stunning Lido House Hotel in Newport Beach. Spaces are limited, so learn more and snag your spot today at klcconsultants.com/alt. Let's make history together. See you there. What's resonating for me and something I've admired about you and I express and talk a lot about on this podcast, and in fact have hired a team and built an entire program to support the development of true thought leadership, because I think that, what you're doing is not just being a voice or an advocate for somebody else and their brand. You're truly investing your time and energy into advancing the industry, into creating and innovating things that don't exist already. And that's a different level of, we talk about exposure. I mean, it's a different level of responsibility. And I'm curious, have you thought of yourself as, I'm an industry thought leader? And do you have any frustrations in this area around sort of this advancement of our industry and also the kind of willy-nilliness of people calling themselves thought leaders or masters?
There's a lot of questions in that question. One, it feels weird to say, I'm a KOL, I'm a thought leader. Like, what does that mean? I am someone that wants and needs to know the why. I always have been. It's funny, I have that child. He will negotiate with me and argue with me on every point. And I cannot just say, because I said so. He has to understand. He absolutely needs to sit and talk through it all. And I'm that annoying person too, right? Yeah. So, and
awful as a mother, except for, they're going to be so successful. You're right. You're like,
he's going to change the world. I'm also reading Elon Musk's book right now. And I'm like, oh, there's my son. Yes. One of those brilliant brains that's really hard to parent. Yeah. So I feel bad for my family. No, this is tricky and vulnerable. Of course, I have imposter syndrome. Of course, 100%. And I think that's normal. I think it's even more normal as a woman. And it's also normal because I'm not a physician. Mm-hmm. And that's also unique because there are barriers because I am just a mid-level, right? Because I made that choice, because Lord knows, I know at this stage of the game that I very easily could have gone to medical school and had different initials after my name. I fully understand that now. But because of life, because of my age, because of what I chose to do early on in my adult life, and then when I decided that this was what I wanted to do, the fastest track to get there was to do PA versus MD. And by no means am I at all disappointed. I don't think that my current lifestyle is hindered by the fact that I have PA after my name and not MD after my name. But I do think that in certain circles, it does create barriers that aren't as easy for me to cross to be able to be as effective as I maybe could be, right? So that's frustrating sometimes. And what was the last part of your question?
Well, first of all, I want to just acknowledge that, yes, we all have imposter syndrome. And I actually think hearing you say that will help a lot of people who are we're all on this quest to get better, right? And so at some point, if you sit back and you're like, I made it, right? Then what happens? So I think there's such a gift in that in some ways. And I think sometimes, yeah.
Yes. And I think, but there's a quest to get better. I agree. But the motivation behind what better means is different for people. And that is sometimes where there's some frustration for me. And I think that was the last part of your question, is the frustration. As in all specialties, all people
in life,
there's more altruistic motivation, and then there's very selfish motivation, and there's narcissism, and there's egos, and there's things that, especially in this industry, and also especially because of social media, that I think have gone way out of control. And there are definitely people that have no problem self-describing as a master injector or a KOL or, an advanced training, whatever trainer. And that's where I do get frustrated. And honestly, I have to be careful, because I dedicate my time so passionately to really trying to understand what's really going on. And there is still such misinformation being spread all the time, and anecdotal opinions being spread as evidence-based, and the ability for the consumer, or even the consumer being the person looking for educational opportunities, where popularity and the amount of followers, and it does, on one hand, it's like, oh, is that hypocritical for me to say, because I have a lot of followers? But on the other hand, I don't expect my follower count to be the reason why you believe what I'm saying. I really don't. And I will give you the evidence for what I share. And I have found myself, and I do, because I'm super passionate. So how do you remove the passion and then not find yourself incredibly frustrated sometimes in situations? And I remember there was, and I will not say who, but there was a moment when I was at a training where there was two trainers, and I knew that one of them did not agree with the other person's statement, and in that moment said nothing for the grace of the educational opportunity and to not look malaligned with their co-presenter. And then, and this was way earlier in my own educational journey. And then I have also had the unfortunate discomfort of being on a panel with someone where we weren't supposed to be negating each other. We were supposed to be synergistically presenting, and I didn't agree, and I couldn't help but make sure I still mentioned that I didn't agree. And then it's not good for the participant. And, so all things are true in this world in that way. But I remember just thinking, I had such a hard time, because I just thought, but you didn't speak your truth, and your truth is the right truth. And that person said something, when I was in that moment of being in the seat and watching these two people, and spoke to one of them after, but you have said X, and while you're up there, you were agreeing with Y. And they just kind of winked at me, hey, that show must go on, kind of a thing, and that's where it's oh,
Well, it goes back to the dance. Right. Because that's what's so interesting about our industry is you keep referring back to evidence-based science. Right. And yet it's an art. And so it's almost like I always say, in any situation when I'm coaching myself through a hard time, I'm okay, there's their opinion and my opinion, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think what's so cool about where we are and what you're doing, Nicola, is that there's a stimulation of thought of sort of disrupting that status quo that is advancing making everybody think in a different way, a little bit more provocatively. And that's how we're all growing. So those conversations are important, right? I think just having dissenting opinion actually makes us stronger and better.
And on the positive, I feel a lot of conferences nowadays are allowing for panel discussions, and they intend for the disruptors, and they intend for the people to actually
you
have
like watching
those.
that stuff.
That's right. We all do. It's like bad reality TV, right? We love a good argument. But I think, at least that's being embraced, and it's not this whole, showcase of like, oh no, we just all have to look a certain way. So all things are true. But I think, we also have to just be aware that this is what's going on. And this is where I just always try and like message, like question everything. Ask for the source, ask for the paper, ask for, and I'll be the first, because you're right. It is. There's this dichotomy, because there is still an aesthetic, artful piece to what we practice. And some of my more nerdy, sciencey friends that I work very, very closely with and do research with, they disagree with the art piece. But I do think that, one, I understand the science and the anatomy and the biomechanics, and then what is happening over time with the product in the face. And I've spent a lot of time really trying to understand and study this. But then on the flip side, I will make choices about how I approach based on how I know the outcome will look as well, with like maybe taking like a little bit of like walking that edge so that I know, and then my results are prettier because of that, right? So you're right. Like they both have to be synergistically respected. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and it's challenging to know as like a consumer, what to look for. Like, certainly I know your Instagram, like you're giving yourself, talking about your education. And I know that's important to you because you put all the time into it. But like when I look at your results, they're pretty badass. I'm like, okay, I want to look like that. Like,
well, you got to back it up. That's right.
Yeah.
You can know all the things. And then if you don't have some amazing, before and afters to say, and see, here's how it looks when you're all done. Right. Like, so you got to have both. For sure.
No, yeah. Totally. So let's talk about, just for a couple of minutes, I want to kind of bring it back into you as, female entrepreneur, 2 years of running and growing and scaling your business very quickly. What's that been like for you? And yeah, let's just start there.
The hardest thing I've ever done besides parenting 2 toddlers.
It's your third baby.
Let's just, we opened N2 in January of 22. In September of 22, my husband had a massive cardiac arrest.
Wow.
And then 6 months after that, we found out that he had a pretty awful congenital heart deformity that was still missed even after the cardiac arrest, and had to have major open heart surgery. And we're just 8 months post-op from that. So I am right now finally feeling like I can exhale.
Wow.
I don't know why I'm getting a little teary. I sure was tested. And I really got tired of everybody telling me that I'm the strongest person they know, and that if anybody could get through it, it's me. And I think I learned a lot in that period of how to let go and allow people to step in. And probably, even this happened for me. But it's been the hardest 2 years of my life.
Wow.
So,
how is your husband doing now?
He's actually doing amazing. And he's doing it. He is truly a weird miracle. My kids actually performed CPR on him, and so did I on the day of his arrest. He didn't have a pulse for 27 minutes, and by all clinical understanding, like he should be, something else should have gone wrong. But he was a witnessed arrest. My younger son called 911. My younger son saw him collapse, and I was actually on the phone with him. I was half a mile away from home on the running ships behind my house, and I know you didn't ask about this, but it simultaneously ties into the first 2 years of my business. And, I don't think as a single business owner, as an entrepreneur, that you can separate your personal from your business life. It is all the same life. There is no like, you go home and work ends and life begins. And even when you're at work, your personal life is there too. So I think that if, it blows me away because I already had such an incredibly successful personal practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because of that we're still here. Because I think that if I was not already practicing for 20 years with a very loyal, committed, patient following, there's no way we would have made it, And so it blows me away because I hear all the time people that like go to a nursing program or, PA program specifically to get into this. And then they open a clinic and I'm just like, you have bigger balls than anyone I've ever met, because it took me so long to finally go like, okay, maybe we can do this and maybe we can make it, and, and that's the thing, we don't go to business school. We don't know law. We don't know HR. And I would say, I know a lot about aesthetics, but I don't know anything about being a leader. And I by no means think that I am great at it. I am learning. That's why when, people like you, and that's why those of us that are trying to go into something like this need people like you, because I, one, have learned a lot from now just doing it and like making horrible mistakes. And, I have definitely mishired and then had to pay the price of having to deal with trying to gracefully get my team to a place where, because your team is everything, right? And I've learned a lot of lessons. That's all I can say. And, we're doing great. Yes. And I think we're so incredibly blessed for where we're at, and we are expanding and we are continuing to go ahead and take risk, even though I could say like, this is good. But I do feel, and there'll be a point where I feel like, I do feel like I'll say, what, this is enough. And we'll settle into that space, but we're not quite there yet. We are right now, as it makes perfect sense, we're expanding into making sure that we have a true training space that is associated with the clinical space. And so we're doubling our square footage, and we're doing that build out currently. And we're building it out in a way that we'll be able to do live webcasts and create online, perpetuity content and things like that, which I think makes sense for me, because at this time, I have to learn how to work smarter, not harder. And at this very moment, unless I'm physically present and there's a needle in my hand or a microphone attached to me, I'm not making any money, And so I, as much as, for sure, so much of what I do is passionate. Let's be honest. We all have to also, I have 2 boys about to start thinking about college. So I have to have a paycheck too. So
yeah. Yeah, it's that sort of position of, I think there's making money, but there's also making a greater impact. When you're somebody that is bringing something important to the world and you're making a change, how do you put yourself strategically in position to share that knowledge in a way where more people can be impacted and can take that, And so it's that inflection point where you are that, you're not alone. And I can't even imagine, forget the bit having a business, but just going through what you went through, through the just being by your husband's side and just the level of uncertainty. You keep saying, using the phrase that things happen for you, not to you. Is that a mindset you've always had? Is that something that you've developed as you've overcome adversities and found yourself in, position to kind of keep going? Is that something you learned as a kid?
No, not at all. I I was having a conversation with a person who I have just great respect for, someone in the business, but more on like the corporate side of things. And just somehow like, there's those rare people that you meet that you suddenly click with. It's like, like the most amazing first date, but it's not a romantic situation. And it's like, you just, you can't. And this person became very close to me. And I remember, I feel like at every crossroads, like I've had all these other things that were just like really trying to make me not do it. Right. There was, I don't want to like share too much, but like there was a period of time when like my son was struggling with something and my dad was like potentially a diagnosis of like kidney cancer that we were facing. And I was opening the business simultaneously. And there was a threat of a lawsuit with a previous employer. And there was like, it was all coming down on me. And I remember I was definitely just having like a poor me, like bitch fest conversation with this person. And, he stopped me in my tracks, and he actually did a little bit of tough love. And this like actually like gave me this, and it's been my mantra maybe like since, and that's why I've repeated it so many times today, because it's like people probably look, at my life on social media, and I allow some vulnerability, and I try and just authentically be me as much as I possibly can. But if you're not paying too close of attention, you're just going to think that my life's all like, sunshine and roses, and that it's like all like just yay happy, it's easy for me, and it's not. And he was like, can I cuss?
Of course, yeah, I got the explicit on Fierce Factor.
All right, okay. So he was like, Nicola, he's like, shut the fuck up. And I was like, and it like was a little bit like a slap, and I was like, okay. He goes, and obviously not like my dad's health thing and like all the other things, but like the other stuff, the more professional stuff that was going on that was yicky, and he was like, that is happening because that is why you're doing what you're doing. And if that person didn't mistreat you, if that person didn't do this, you would have been complacent and you would have stayed where you were. But it was because you were being kind of like pushed into this corner, and it is now giving you the greatest gift of your life. And I remember when I just like was like, oh, like I felt so stupid, like for sitting here whining, you know what I mean? And I was like, it was absolutely right. And I think that's where we get it wrong in life, is that we think that like all these things are happening to us, and we have this victim mentality. And the reality is, it's like, you know what? There will always be things happening to you. There will. And you have to figure out within yourself, like how to have that compass to keep driving forward and to do the right thing. And I will never, ever negotiate on my integrity. And I will always make sure that I am the person that is doing it right. Just like you said all those years ago, that's what we do now too in our clinical space. There is something that bothers me a lot in this industry about the lack of regulation and the fact that so many people own clinics, and and this is, I want to make sure I just share this little caveat before I say this, but, I believe that RNs can inject and should inject. And I know many RNs that are incredibly talented, but the oversight and the way that this is all happening in terms of like, the medical board and the nursing board, and the fact that so much gray is being taken advantage of is very disturbing to me. And I do believe that while there are very good nurses out there that are injecting and doing wonderful work and are very intelligent and a blessing to the space, that there are also corporate owned facilities with lack of oversight where nurses are practicing medicine and do not have the right type of supervision or the right type of
mentorship,
anything. And that they're fresh out of school, and they're doing things that maybe they shouldn't, just like I did early in the beginning when I didn't know anything. And then I learned the hard way by hurting somebody. And so anyway, that's just, that's a big thing for me as well. I mean, I can't tell you how much I've spent in attorney's fees getting my law degree, basically,
Yeah,
in
right.
terms of making sure that we do it the right way. But I think that's something that needs to be considered. And that's where I do have an issue with all the corporatization stuff, because we have non-medical people starting to drive this industry. And that is very concerning to me.
Yes.
That's a whole other podcast too.
That is a whole other podcast to be continued. Yeah. And I have versions of this conversation with, colleagues of yours who are also, driving research and, more of the evidence, fact finding the evidence in the industry and trying to kind of move it. And I was at a conference last year and I heard a CEO of one of our big pharma companies say, basically, our goal is to commoditize, toxins as much as possible and make it like it's a hydrofacial, and I was just like, wow, these are this is the downstream leadership. And so it does take a village at this point. And I think we're, for as advanced as we are, we're still, also so there's so much to learn and so much of this sweetness in the fruit, so to speak, extract. And so, you're talking about this sort of the space for growth and where you are, right? And now I'm taking this exhale and I'm, ready to scale up and kind of moving into this new place to take the business and the training academy and all of this. So you clearly see so much potential in this industry, right? Otherwise you wouldn't make those investments. You would just and, go back to your, so what are your predictions, Nicola, for the industry over the next 5 to 10 years? And how would you advise your students to really prepare now for what the future has to bring?
I mean, I think we all know that there's incredible projected growth still. I think that, I've been fortunate enough to be a participant in, kind of those pipeline conversations, what's coming. I have many colleagues that I'm very close with in Europe, and I think that we oftentimes are just a few years behind them in terms of things that are going to be coming down into our opportunities. I think that regenerative treatments are going to become more and more popular. We see companies like Acorn, where, we're just at the forefront of these stem cell and exosome, products that are going to be coming into our space. And then you have choices again, which one is going to be the better one and what's great for business and what's great and there's so much we don't know about all of that. But I see a shift, a transition, and I'm seeing it more and more with a lot of my friends, where it's this holistic approach to health and wellness, and aesthetics is kind of one piece of that, which I love, because I think that, we're moving away from that all things can be fixed with toxin filler. And that is still a message that I feel like I'm constantly trying to shift for patients as well, where they get a dopamine hit from the immediate filler results, and then they keep wanting to have that dopamine hit. And at a certain point, you've passed the threshold, and now there's no more dopamine. Now you just look weird, and we've got to do corrective work. I think that a big part of our practices now, after 20 years of, Botox and fillers, and more specifically, obviously fillers, because we know that they last in the face for decades, not for just, 6 months or a year, like the quote unquote FDA leaflet. But that a big part of where we need to be focused is on understanding quote unquote complication management, but not just, in terms of an immediate complication response, but, poor outcome management, where we want to take people back to a more beautiful, natural baseline. And I'm at the helm with several others, like-minded people that are trying to push the utilization of imaging, aka ultrasound, in aesthetics. I think that's another reason why a lot of people will come and fly to see me versus going to see someone in their local town, because they know that I have an opportunity to, one, get more information about them and to, keep them safer that way. and I have inquiries daily for corrective work. And so I think that, and it's funny because what I have found is that anytime there's a complication or there's a trouble with like doing corrective work, the first thing that every single provider says is, well, who has an ultrasound? And without regard of whether or not they actually know how to use the ultrasound properly or not, but like, who has an ultrasound? We have to call them, But then there's still this lack of investment in that education and that learning curve. And there's some sort of trepidation where they think that learning curve is so big and insurmountable that they're afraid to go ahead and take it. And where I see that the most is actually in more experienced providers, honestly. But, so I'm hopeful because I am very passionate about bringing ultrasound into our space in a more, where it's becoming the norm as opposed to this like unique thing that people offer. So, I think there's so many places that this industry is going. I think we only see growth. I think that, everybody in the TikTok age bracket is interested in biohacking and how can I, and they're already like, how do I prevent and how do I, never age and all this stuff. And so, there's a lot of room for a lot of things. And it's exciting. So it is a great space to be involved in, and uniquely, we are lucky because it's not necessarily driven by insurance companies and, where we're required to practice within a certain way. But this is where I would also warn against, what I think is happening right now in the aesthetic space, and what I will, and I'll never say never, but for a long time will not just join forces with some private equity group that come in. And last week I had 4 reach out to me that want to buy me already. And I'm just like, I haven't even started yet, like, what are you buying, But I would warn business owners that currently own their practices. And I would also just look at what happened to the dental industry. There are hardly any privately owned dental practices anymore. And how awful is that, right? And I feel like there's this, none of us are good or want to be good necessarily at business. And we want to just stick to what we know and let somebody else deal with all the heartache, because all that stuff isn't the fun, sexy side of things. And so somebody comes in and then they're your boss now. And then that's going, and if too much of that happens, we've lost the industry to people that are truly coming from a medical perspective. And to me, that's incredibly dangerous. And it's going to be a huge disservice to the aesthetic industry as a whole, because all of the progress and the intensity of the passion of what we're trying to do is now being dictated and overseen and limited by bean counters.
By dollars and numbers. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Well said. Yeah. It's a very slippery slope. So something I've been investing a lot of my time, energy, research, and thought into. So we'll have another podcast on that as well. But I appreciate it. So, okay. So I'm going to, this has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like we could talk all day, and I know you have a billion things to do. So I'd love to sort of wrap up, Nicola, with just any other thoughts, that come to mind, in terms of this legacy that you're looking to leave behind in our industry, and any advice that you would give to the Fears Factor podcast listeners.
It's such a funny thing to like think I would leave a legacy, but one of my favorite musicals all time is Hamilton, and that closing song is "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story," right? And and you think about that, and it's like, when you're gone, and we're all going to be gone one day, what's your story going to be? And I'm still writing my story, and I hope that my story leaves an impact that I was able to inspire and to touch as many people as I possibly can, and get them excited to really want to do things the right way. And I think, just question everything. Always make sure that you're take things with a grain of salt, and use your critical thinking when you are listening to others, and make sure that you stay ethical and that you keep doing this all for the right reasons.
Gave me chills. I think it sounds like you're well on your way. to carving out that story for yourself. So I personally want to thank you as you've impacted me in so many ways and so many of the women that I get to work with on a daily basis. And I'm excited to continue our conversations, and I'm excited for what's to come, for this industry, and to have a thought leader like you to be leading the charge. So it's been such a pleasure having the chat with you, and thanks for everything you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Listen, leader, if you're vibing with me here, hang tight, because I have a brand new resource for you. You are a successful, confident, powerful woman who just isn't into being average. No, you have a calling, and part of that calling is requiring you to level up. And I know that if you're working to cross the next $1 million milestone in your business, you need to be in the right circles. And perhaps that's why you found us. I'd love to invite you to join The Blueprint, a weekly resource for inspired, provocative thinkers who are taking this conversation to the next level. Get access to free business tools, podcast supplements, guideposts, and direct communication with me and my expert team. And of course, a masterfully curated circle of women making big moves and disrupting the status quo in aesthetics and wellness. You can link directly through the show notes or head to klcconsultants.com/blueprint. It's time to elevate. See you there, goddess.